London, June 14th, 1801, in a townhouse bedroom that smells of medicine and regret. Benedict Arnold is dying. In the corner sits a folded Continental Army uniform, faded blue wool, tarnished buttons. They say he asked to die in it, the uniform of the army he betrayed. Nobody tells you that America's greatest traitor was first its greatest soldier. The man who tried to sell West Point had bled for it at Quebec, Valcour Island, Saratoga. Nobody explains how legitimate grievances curdle into treason, how a hero's pride becomes his poison. Here's what they won't admit. Arnold had every reason to feel betrayed. He was the only general who could outfight the British. Congress despised him, stole his credit, blocked his promotions, questioned his honor. They made a traitor, then acted shocked when he became one. The difference between patriot and traitor sometimes comes down to which wounds you let fester. If you enjoy history's darker corners, where heroes fall and villains were once human, consider subscribing. Now, take a slow, deep breath. Settle in. Tonight, we follow a hero's fall into the one villain every American can name and ask whether the revolution betrayed him first. Before the betrayal, before the bitter letters and secret meetings, before he became a curse word in American mouths, Benedict Arnold was the kind of soldier who made other men believe in impossible things. October 1777, and the forests around Saratoga, New York are dressed in their funeral best. Reds and golds that mirror the blood about to be spilled. The morning air carries that peculiar autumn chill that makes men's breath visible, as if their very souls were trying to escape before the killing starts. Which brings us to Saratoga, where hell is about to have its grand opening. The morning of October 7th, 1777, dawns with that crystalline clarity that makes autumn in upstate New York almost worth the winters. In the American camp, Benedict Arnold paces like a caged panther. 3 weeks earlier, after the first inconclusive battle, General Horatio Gates had stripped him of his command. Politics, of course. Gates, who preferred to wage war from the safety of his tent, studying maps while other men studied mortality, had grown tired of his subordinate's popularity with the troops. When you're a commander who leads from behind, a subordinate who leads from the front becomes a problem. So Arnold paces, officially relieved of command but unable to leave. His leg aches, an old wound from the Quebec campaign that never quite healed right. He's 36 years old, which in soldier years might as well be ancient. He should be home in Connecticut, managing his business affairs, counting the cost of patriotism in a ledger written entirely in red ink. Instead, he's here, listening to the sound of musket fire beginning to echo through the trees. British General Burgoyne has launched his desperate gambit, trying to break through American lines before his supplies run out entirely. The sound builds, first scattered pops like corn in a skillet, then rising to that continuous roar that means men are dying in earnest. Arnold's hands clench and unclench. Every instinct screams at him to ride toward the sound. These are his men out there, the ones he trained, but orders are orders, and he's been ordered to sit this one out. By afternoon, the American line begins to buckle. From his vantage point, Arnold can see it happening. That subtle shift in movement that means courage is giving way to fear. Gates sits in his headquarters, moving pins on maps, while the battle slips away. That's when Benedict Arnold makes the decision that will secure his place in history. The first history, the one written in glory instead of infamy. Without orders, without permission, without any authority except what he seizes for himself. He mounts his horse and rides toward the sound of the guns. Witnesses describe what happens next with the kind of awe usually reserved for religious experiences. Arnold appears through the smoke like something out of myth. Uniform coat flying, sword drawn, spurring his horse directly into the wavering American line. He doesn't ask for command. He simply takes it and men who've been told he has no authority follow him anyway because that's what you do when lightning chooses to lead. The American retreat becomes an advance. Arnold identifies the key to the British position, a fortified redoubt commanded by German mercenaries. Take that position, and Burgoyne's entire right flank collapses. He leads the charge himself, his horse shot from under him, then another, but nothing stops him from reaching those enemy walls. In the midst of this carnage, at the very moment of triumph, fate extracts its price. A Hessian musket ball. One of thousands fired that day, but this one with Benedict Arnold's name on it smashes into his left leg. The same leg wounded at Quebec. The bone shatters like kindling. His horse falls on the wounded limb, crushing it further. Arnold screams, not from pain, though that must be exquisite, but from rage. He's done it. He's turned the battle. He's saved the revolution. And now this. Soldiers rush to pull him free, to carry him from the field. As they lift him, he shouts orders, still commanding even as blood pools in his boot. The surgeons want to amputate. It's the standard treatment for a shattered leg. Saw it off before gangrene sets in. Arnold, semi-conscious from pain and blood loss, manages to make himself understood. He'd rather die a soldier than live as a reminder of what he used to be. The word comes out harsh, angry, full of the pride that will one day destroy him. For now, that pride saves his leg, though it will never be the same. Saratoga is won. Burgoyne surrenders. France enters the war, and American independence transforms from desperate hope to probable outcome. It's the turning point everyone remembers. What they forget is who turned it. From his hospital bed, Arnold can hear the celebrations. Bonfires light the October nights. Citizens who weeks ago were packing to flee now toast the great victory. General Gates's victory, according to the report sent to Congress. Somehow, in the official dispatches, Gates has won a battle from his tent while Arnold's name appears as a footnote, if at all. The leg heals, after a fashion. 2 inches shorter than the other now. It will give him a permanent limp, a dragging gait that marks him as clearly as any brand. Every step for the rest of his life will remind him of Saratoga. Every halting stride will whisper of what he sacrificed and what he received in return, which was nothing, or worse than nothing. He got the privilege of watching lesser men claim his glory while he lay fevered and forgotten. Listening to the celebrations of a victory that belonged to him, Congress, in its infinite wisdom, decides the hero of Saratoga needs investigating. Questions about his expenses, concerns about his conduct, whispers about his loyalty. The same body that couldn't provide boots for its soldiers now wants receipts for every dollar Arnold spent saving their revolution. The bitter irony would be funny if it weren't so perfectly tragic. Here lies Benedict Arnold, leg shattered in service to his country, pride wounded worse than any bone, watching mediocrity receive the laurels that courage earned. The hero of Saratoga closes his eyes and listens to other men cheer for other men's glory. In the darkness behind his eyelids, something begins to rot. Not the leg, that will heal, more or less. Something deeper, something that all the surgeons in the Continental Army can't cut away. Pride is a peculiar poison. It enters through wounds you didn't know you had and spreads through channels you can't see. By the time you realize you're infected, it's already too late. Benedict Arnold, hero of Saratoga, has just received his first dose. The winter of 1778 found Arnold in Philadelphia, his shattered leg still refusing to heal properly, his wounded pride festering like an untreated infection. Congress, in what passed for wisdom, appointed him military governor of the recently liberated city. It was meant as an honor. It became another link in the chain that would drag him to treason. Philadelphia was beautiful, sharp, and dangerous to handle carelessly. The same families who danced with British officers now proclaim their patriotism. That's where he met her, Margaret Shippen, Peggy to her intimates, 18 years old. beautiful and clever enough to be dangerous. She danced with British officers during the occupation, including a charming major named John Andre, who wrote poetry and sketched her portrait. The same John Andre who now served as General Clinton's head of intelligence. They married in April 1779, Arnold sparing no expense he couldn't afford, but wealth was precisely what he didn't have. The war had destroyed his merchant business. Congress questioned every receipt he submitted for reimbursement. Bureaucrats who'd spent the war in warm offices now investigating every expense of the man who'd spent it bleeding in frozen fields. The accusations came fast and sharp. Corruption, they said. War profiteering. Joseph Reed, Pennsylvania's president, led the charge with the enthusiasm of a man who'd spent the war writing letters while Arnold led charges. The court-martial, when it finally came, was predetermined theatre. Arnold was officially censured by Washington himself. The rebuke was gentle, almost apologetic, but it burned like acid on raw flesh. Meanwhile, Peggy whispered in the darkness of their marriage bed, "Such terrible treatment," she sighed. "Such ingratitude." Her fingers traced the scar tissue on his ruined leg as she spoke of other possibilities. Other loyalties. The British, she mentioned casually, knew how to reward talent. The first letter was the hardest. Arnold sat at his desk, good leg stretched out, bad leg throbbing, staring at blank paper. Outside, Philadelphia slept uneasily, a city caught between revolution and reaction. The candle flickered, casting shadows that danced like hanged men. He dipped his quill and began to write. Not treason, not yet, just inquiry. A careful feeling out of possibilities. What would a man of his talents be worth to the other side, hypothetically speaking? The kind of letter that could be explained away if intercepted, but would be understood perfectly by those meant to read it. The words came slowly at first, then faster. All those slights, all those wounds, all those bills unpaid and honours denied. They flowed onto paper like blood from a fresh cut. By the time he signed it with a false name, the die was cast. Not cast irretrievably, perhaps, but tossed high in the air, spinning between salvation and damnation. He sealed the letter with wax and addressed it through intermediaries who knew how to reach the right people. Then he limped to bed, where his young wife smiled in her sleep, dreaming of whatever young wives dream of when married to older husbands they may or may not love. Arnold lay awake, listening to the city bells toll midnight. Each chime seemed to ask the same question. What is a hero worth? What is the price of glory denied? He'd spent his fortune on the revolution. He'd shattered his body for it. He'd won its crucial battle and watched lesser men claim the credit. Now they questioned his honour, investigated his expenses, reprimanded him for trivialities while real corruption flourished all around. The 1,000 cuts had been inflicted with surgical precision. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, accusations, investigations, slights, denials, each one individually survivable. But together they bled a man dry of everything but bitterness. Philadelphia slept on, unaware that in a mansion on High Street, Benedict Arnold had begun writing a different kind of history, the kind written in invisible ink and bitter necessity, the kind that would make his name synonymous with the worst word in the American language. But that was still to come. For now, there was only a man with a ruined leg and a ruined reputation, writing letters by candlelight, each word a step down a path from which there could be no returning. The candle guttered and died, in the darkness. Arnold smiled the kind of smile that would have frightened his enemies if they'd seen it. They'd made their choice about what he was worth. Now he would make his. The thing about crossing lines is that the first step is the hardest. After that, each transgression comes easier than the last, until you're so far over the border you can't even see it anymore. Benedict Arnold discovered this truth in the spring of 1779, hunched over his desk in the pre-dawn darkness, mixing the ingredients for invisible ink. The smell filled his study, metallic, sharp, faintly sulphurous, the scent of secrets. His hands, steady on a battlefield, trembled slightly as he prepared the mixture. This wasn't fear. Benedict Arnold had faced cannon fire without flinching. This was something else. Anticipation, perhaps, or recognition of the moment when everything changes. The correspondence had evolved with frightening speed. What began as careful inquiry had become serious negotiation. His handler, though neither of them used that word, was Major John Andre, the same charming officer who'd once sketched Peggy's portrait. They wrote like old friends reunited, all coded pleasantries and veiled meanings. Mr. Moore wrote to John Anderson about business opportunities, import and export, profit margins, the kind of letters that bored postal inspectors into inattention, but between the lines, written in that careful chemical mixture, lay the real communication. Troop movements, supply levels, the defences of West Point, which Arnold now commanded, the greatest fortress in America, guardian of the Hudson River, key to the entire rebellion, all reduced to invisible ink on ordinary paper. Arnold established his price with the cold calculation of the merchant he'd once been. £20,000 sterling for West Point, a general's commission in the British Army, protection for his family, pensions for life. He itemised his treason like a bill of goods, each betrayal priced according to its value. Andre negotiated like the gentleman he was, polite even in perfidy. The British would pay, of course. His Majesty valued talent, especially talent that came pre-trained by the enemy, but there must be guarantees, proof of sincerity, something concrete to justify such lavish compensation. So Arnold began to bleed West Point dry. One detail at a time, the placement of cannon, the weakness in the water batteries, the number of men fit for duty versus the number on the rolls, guard rotations, password protocols, magazine locations, everything an attacker would need to know to take the fortress with minimal loss of British life. He wrote these secrets in the hours before dawn, when the house lay silent and even Peggy slept. The invisible ink dried clear, leaving what appeared to be innocent business correspondence. Only when heated would the words appear, brown as dried blood against the paper. Sometimes he wondered who performed that ritual on the other end. Andre himself? Some clerk assigned to intelligence work? Did they understand they were reading the death warrant of American independence? The irony wasn't lost on him. Here sat Benedict Arnold, the man who'd saved the revolution at Saratoga, now methodically planning its destruction. The same strategic mind that had identified British weaknesses now catalogued American vulnerabilities. Poetic justice, perhaps, or just poetry of the darkest kind. Peggy knew, of course, not the details. He kept those from her, some last gesture at protecting her innocence. But she knew the late nights, the locked study door, the letters that had to be hand-delivered to specific merchants. She played her role perfectly. The devoted young wife concerned only with domestic matters. If occasionally she mentioned how lovely London was this time of year, or how well British officers treated their wives, well, what harm in a young woman's musings? By summer, the arrangement was nearly complete. Arnold manoeuvred for command of West Point, calling in favours, playing on Washington's trust. The commander who'd reprimanded him still valued his military mind. When Arnold pleaded that his leg made field command impossible, but that he could still serve in a fortress command, Washington acquiesced. In August 1780, Benedict Arnold took command of the Gibraltar of America. He toured his new domain with a traitor's eye. Every strength was noted for how it could become weakness, every defensive position evaluated for how it could be turned. He issued orders that seemed reasonable but slowly, subtly, weakened the fortress. Supplies were dispersed, repairs were delayed. The chain across the Hudson, that massive iron barrier that prevented British ships from sailing upriver, was neglected until links began to rust. His correspondence with Andre reached a fever pitch. They needed to meet, to finalise details too sensitive even for invisible ink. Arnold suggested a personal conference, soldier to soldier, to discuss the final arrangements. Andre agreed, though he knew the risk. Spies caught out of uniform faced the noose, no matter how charming their manner or noble their birth. They set the meeting for September 21st, 1780. Andre would come up the Hudson on a British sloop, the Vulture. They would meet at a safe house on the western shore. Final payments would be discussed, final guarantees given. The date for West Point's surrender would be set. The revolution would end not with a bang but with a whisper. The right words to the right guards at the right gates. Arnold prepared with the attention to detail that had won in battles. Safe houses were arranged, passwords established, men who could be trusted, or at least bought, put in key positions. Every contingency was considered except one, the possibility that Providence, having a sense of irony, might intervene. The night before Andre's arrival, Arnold couldn't sleep. He stood at the window of his quarters, looking out over West Point. Moonlight silvered the fortifications he was about to betray. Somewhere below, sentries walked their posts, trusting in their commander's vigilance. Tomorrow, he would sell them all. Was there a moment of doubt? A flicker of the patriotism that had once burned so bright? If so, he crushed it with practiced ease. Patriotism was a luxury for men who hadn't been cheated, slandered, and cast aside. Let others wrap themselves in noble causes. Benedict Arnold would wrap himself in British gold and sleep warm for the rest of his life. The letter confirming the meeting went out with the Morning Post. In a few days, it would all be over. The fortress would fall, the revolution would collapse, and Benedict Arnold would finally receive his due. Not as the hero of Saratoga. That man was dead, killed by 1,000 cuts of congressional ingratitude, but as something else, something harder, something that paid better. He sealed the letter with wax and the signet ring that bore his family arms. The motto read, Nil desperandum, never despair. Once, it had meant courage in the face of adversity. Now it meant something darker. When hope dies, other options present themselves. The die wasn't just cast, it was loaded, thrown, and rolling toward its inevitable result. Benedict Arnold, American general, was about to become Benedict Arnold, British officer. All it would take was one meeting, one handshake, one final exchange of promises and pounds. What could possibly go wrong? September 21st, 1780. The Hudson River Valley wore autumn like a death shroud, all crimson and gold, as if nature itself had dressed for the funeral of American independence. Major John Andre sat in the cabin of HMS Vulture, adjusting his civilian clothes with the discomfort of a man used to military precision. No scarlet coat today, no gold braid or polished buttons, just the plain dress of a merchant, complete with false papers identifying him as John Anderson. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here sat one of His Majesty's most elegant officers, poet and artist, reduced to skulking in disguise like a common criminal. But the prize justified the indignity. West Point, and with it, the revolution, was hours away from changing hands. Arnold had arranged everything with his usual attention to detail. The meeting would take place at the house of Joshua Hett Smith, a man whose loyalties were as flexible as his conscience. A boat waited to ferry Andre from the Vulture to the western shore. Passwords had been established, safe passage guaranteed. What could be simpler? But simplicity and war make poor bedfellows. The boat arrived hours late, the first sign that Providence had its own plans. Andre made the crossing in darkness, the oars dipping silent into water black as his intentions. On the western shore, a figure waited, cloaked and limping. Their first meeting was almost absurdly cordial. Two gentlemen discussing the transfer of a nation's hopes as if negotiating the price of wheat. They talked through the night in Smith's house while candles burned low and the fire died to embers. Arnold spread maps across the table, his fingers tracing the death of American independence across paper. Here, the weak points in the fortifications. There, the positions of artillery. This route for the assault, that signal for the surrender. Professional courtesy between soldiers, even if one of them was selling his soul by candlelight. Andre took notes in neat script, occasionally asking clarifying questions. The artist in him appreciated the elegant simplicity of Arnold's plan. The fortress would fall with minimal bloodshed. The garrison would be captured whole. The revolution would collapse like a house of cards with its central support removed. Clean, efficient, final. Dawn came too soon, and with it, unwelcome news. American artillery had fired on the Vulture during the night, forcing her to drop downriver. Andre's route back to British lines had just become considerably more complicated. Arnold, ever the problem solver, proposed a solution. Andre would travel overland in disguise, with passes signed by Arnold himself. What American sentry would dare question documents bearing the commanding general's signature? It meant travelling through enemy territory in civilian clothes, technically making him a spy rather than an officer on military business. But what choice did they have? This was the moment, the crucial decision that would echo through history. Andre could have insisted on waiting for the Vulture's return, maintaining his status as a uniformed officer. Instead, eager to complete his mission, he agreed to Arnold's plan. He tucked the incriminating documents, all those maps and plans and secrets, inside his stockings, accepted the passes, and set off with Smith as guide. Benedict Arnold watched him go with the satisfaction of a man who's just closed the deal of a lifetime. In a few days, British forces would attack West Point. He would ensure the defence was token at best. The fortress would fall, he would claim his reward, and history would remember him as the man who ended a pointless rebellion. He might even be made a lord. Lord Arnold had a nice ring to it. What happened next was the kind of cosmic joke that makes one wonder if God has a sense of humour, or just a mean streak. Andre and Smith made good progress the first day. The passes worked perfectly. Arnold's signature was a magic talisman that opened all doors. They spent the night at a farmhouse, Andre maintaining his merchant disguise with admirable composure. Only Smith noticed how his companion's hands shook slightly when American patrols passed close by. On September 23rd, Smith decided he'd guided Andre far enough. They were near Tarrytown, close enough to British lines that Andre could complete the journey alone. Smith turned back, leaving the elegant major to navigate the last few miles of his mission solo. The three men who changed history were named John Paulding, David Williams, and Isaac Van Wart. Militia members, though armed thugs might be more accurate. They made their living in that grey zone between patriotism and banditry, robbing travellers and calling it war service. When they spotted a lone rider approaching, they saw opportunity. Halt! Which party do you belong to? Andre, seeing their civilian clothes and mistaking them for loyalists, made the fatal error. The lower party, he said, meaning the British who controlled Lower New York. It was the wrong answer, or the right one, depending on perspective. The militiamen revealed themselves as Americans, and suddenly Andre's excellent adventure became a nightmare. He tried to recover, producing Arnold's passes, claiming to be John Anderson on business for General Arnold. But these weren't regular soldiers impressed by signatures and seals. These were hard men who lived by their wits and trusted their instincts. Something about this well-spoken merchant didn't ring true. They ordered him to dismount, to submit to search. Andre tried bribery first, his gold watch, money, promises of more if they'd let him pass. The offers only increased suspicion. What merchant travelled with such wealth? Why was he so eager to avoid search? They stripped him with the casual efficiency of men who'd done this before. In his boots, nothing. In his pockets, only the passes and some continental currency. But in his stockings, the papers were damning beyond any possibility of explanation. West Point's defences laid bare, artillery positions, troop strengths, all in Arnold's handwriting, all signed with his name. The militiamen might have been thugs, but they weren't stupid. They knew they'd caught something bigger than a simple spy. Andre maintained his composure even as his world collapsed. He was taken to the nearest American post, still claiming to be John Anderson, still hoping Arnold's influence might yet save him. The local commander, Lieutenant Colonel John Jameson, was exactly the kind of by-the-book officer you didn't want handling a delicate situation. He saw Arnold's signature on the passes and, despite the incriminating documents, decided the proper procedure was to inform Arnold himself of the capture. A messenger was dispatched to West Point with news that would transform Benedict Arnold from American general to American nightmare. Meanwhile, Andre sat in captivity, watching his options dwindle with each passing hour, still hoping his charm and Arnold's power might conjure an escape from the noose that was already tightening around his neck. The cosmic joke was approaching its punchline. Two men had met in darkness to sell a nation. Now one sat in chains while a messenger rode through the dawn toward West Point, carrying news that would send the other fleeing into the same darkness that had birthed their conspiracy. The dance of spies was about to become a mad scramble for survival, with only one of them destined to make it to the final bow. September 25th, 1780. Benedict Arnold sat at the head of his table, carving ham with steady hands while his mind raced through contingencies. Peggy was still upstairs with their infant son. His aides discussed the day's duties, everything perfectly ordinary except for the messenger riding hard from Tarrytown with news that would shatter this careful facade. Washington was coming. That alone would have been cause for anxiety. The Commander-in-Chief had announced a surprise inspection of West Point. Arnold had been preparing all week, ensuring the fortress appeared strong while actually being weak as water. But Washington's visit was expected. What wasn't expected was the dust-covered rider who arrived just as the breakfast dishes were being cleared. Lieutenant Colonel Jameson's message was a masterpiece of military incompetence wrapped in proper protocol. A suspicious person calling himself John Anderson had been captured with papers describing West Point's defences. The papers appeared to be in General Arnold's handwriting. The prisoner had been sent to South Salem. The papers were being forwarded to General Washington. And here's where incompetence reached truly spectacular heights. Would General Arnold please explain this puzzling situation? Time stopped, or perhaps it accelerated. Arnold read the message twice, his face a study and practiced calm while his mind screamed calculations. Andre captured, papers discovered, Washington en route, the mathematics of disaster computed to a single solution. Run. But first, the performance of a lifetime. Arnold rose from the table with deliberate calm, informing his aides that urgent business required his immediate attention at the fortress. He climbed the stairs to his bedroom where Peggy waited, some instinct having told her that today was different. What words passed between them in those final moments? Did she know he was leaving her to face the storm alone? Did he promise to send for her? Did they share a last kiss that tasted of treason and tears? History records only that Arnold emerged minutes later, buckling on his sword, calling for his barge. His aides found nothing unusual in their commander conducting a sudden inspection. The Hudson River was their highway, the barge their usual conveyance. Just another morning at West Point, except for the way Arnold's hands trembled slightly as he descended to the dock. The barge crew noticed nothing amiss as they pushed off from shore, 8 oarsmen pulling in rhythm, carrying their general on what appeared to be routine business. Arnold sat in the stern, the picture of command, while his mind ran through the geometry of escape. The Vulture lay at anchor 18 miles downriver. 18 miles between Benedict Arnold, the American general, and Benedict Arnold, the British officer. 18 miles across which to transform from patriot to pariah. He waited until they'd rounded the first bend, West Point disappearing behind autumn trees, before giving the order that would confirm his treason beyond any doubt. "Make for the Vulture, lads, quick as you can." The oarsmen exchanged glances. The Vulture was a British warship, but Arnold was their commander. His tone brooked no argument, and soldiers are trained to obey. They bent their backs to the work, pulling harder now, the barge cutting through water that reflected the flame-coloured trees like nature's commentary on the burning of bridges. Arnold stood in the bow of his barge, every inch the commander, even as he prepared to shed that identity like a snake molting skin. "I am General Arnold," he called across the water. "I have urgent business with your captain." The transformation was almost magical. One moment an American general in an American barge, the next, that same man climbing British rope ladders to British decks, shaking hands with British officers who welcomed him with a mixture of respect and revulsion reserved for useful traitors. But what of his bargemen, 8 American soldiers who'd rowed their general to treason without knowing it? Arnold faced them from the Vulture's deck with something that might have been regret. These men had served him faithfully. Their reward would be imprisonment. "You are now prisoners of war," he informed them, his voice carrying across water that suddenly seemed wide as an ocean. "You will be well treated." One of the bargemen, history doesn't record his name, though it should, spat into the Hudson. The gesture said everything words couldn't about loyalty betrayed and trust shattered. The others simply stared, processing the impossible truth that their commander had just defected before their eyes. Arnold turned away from their accusing gazes. On the Vulture's deck, British officers waited with strained politeness. They needed him, certainly. His defection was a tremendous propaganda victory, but needing a traitor and respecting him were vastly different things. The distinction would flavour the rest of his life like bitter medicine. As the Vulture weighed anchor and began her journey downriver, Arnold might have looked back at the autumn hills that held West Point. Somewhere up there, Washington was arriving to find chaos. Peggy was beginning her performance of hysterical innocence. His aides were discovering the truth about their commander. The machinery of his exposure was grinding into motion, but Arnold was already writing the next chapter of his strange story. Before the Vulture reached New York, he'd penned a letter to Washington, attempting to justify the unjustifiable. He spoke of ill treatment, of unpaid debts, of honour impugned and services unrecognised. All true and all insufficient. Some acts are beyond explanation, and selling your country ranks high among them. He also wrote to Peggy, though what comfort words could offer when he'd left her to face the whirlwind alone. She would play her part magnificently, convincing Washington himself that she was an innocent victim of her husband's deception. Whether that was true or merely the greatest performance of her life remains one of history's perfect mysteries. The Vulture reached New York Harbor as evening painted the sky in shades of blood and ash. Arnold stood at her rail, no longer American, not quite British, suspended between worlds like a man hanged but not yet dead. Behind him lay everything he'd been, hero of Saratoga, Washington's trusted general, defender of the cause. Ahead lay, what? Money. Certainly. The British would pay, though not the full amount since West Point remained in American hands. A commission in His Majesty's service, fighting against men he'd once led. A lifetime of being pointed at, whispered about, held at arm's length even by those who benefited from his treason. The warship dropped anchor among the British fleet, and Benedict Arnold stepped onto the dock as the most hated man in America. Somewhere in the gathering darkness, Andre sat in captivity, paying the price for Arnold's escape. One spy caught, another delivered safely to those who would use but never trust him. The flight was over, the transformation complete. Benedict Arnold the hero was dead, and something else stood in his place. Useful to his new masters, despised by his old comrades, and trusted by absolutely no one. He'd finally gotten what he thought he wanted: recognition, reward, respect for his talents. The cosmic joke was that it came wrapped in universal contempt, paid in the currency of eternal shame, but that realization would come later. For now, there were British generals to meet, reports to write, a new uniform to don. The business of being a traitor, Arnold would discover, was remarkably similar to the business of being a patriot. Only the flag had changed, and the small matter of being able to sleep at night. The British gave Benedict Arnold exactly what he deserved, which is to say they gave him everything he had asked for and nothing he actually wanted. The uniform came first: scarlet coat with a brigadier general's epaulettes, gleaming buttons, sword with a golden hilt. The transformation was complete, and completely hollow. Clinton received him with the enthusiasm reserved for a particularly useful tool. But it was in the officers' mess that Arnold discovered the true price of his bargain. Conversations died when he entered. Fellow officers addressed him with icy correctness, never warmth. Behind his back came the whispers: traitor, turncoat, can't trust a man who'd sell his own side. Meanwhile, John Andre faced his captors with more dignity than anyone had a right to expect. October 2nd, 1780. He walked to the gallows steady as if on parade, even helped adjust the noose. His last words were dignified, mentioning nothing of the man whose treachery had brought him to this moment. The drop was clean. Within minutes, the charming major who'd nearly won the war for Britain was just cooling meat, twisting slightly in the morning breeze. Arnold learned of Andre's death in his comfortable quarters. History doesn't record his immediate reaction, only what came after: a hardening, a calcification of whatever remained of his conscience. The bridge wasn't just burned, it was atomized. The British put their expensive new asset to work immediately. He led brutal raids into Virginia and Connecticut, burning with the efficiency of someone erasing his own past. Each successful raid created more American patriots than his heroism ever had. Nothing unites like a common enemy, and Benedict Arnold became the ultimate unifier. Peggy joined him eventually, playing the devoted wife in their New York mansion. The money came through, £6,000 sterling, plus pensions, plus payments. Arnold had made himself rich and reviled in equal measure. He tried to build a new life on the ashes of the old, invested in privateering ventures that failed, attempted business in the West Indies that collapsed. Everything he touched seemed cursed, as if his treason had poisoned his very fingerprints. Even his military service for the British became problematic. Fellow officers resented serving alongside a traitor. Subordinates obeyed grudgingly, knowing that following Arnold's orders meant following a man without honour. His tactical brilliance remained, but brilliance without trust is like a sword without a hilt, dangerous to wield. The war ended, as wars do, with exhaustion rather than resolution. Yorktown fell, Cornwallis surrendered, and American independence became fact rather than aspiration. Arnold watched from the sidelines as the cause he'd tried to destroy succeeded despite him, or perhaps because of him. His treason had unified Americans in ways patriotic speeches never could. The peace treaty left Arnold in limbo. America would never forgive him. Britain had no further use for him. He'd become what every traitor eventually becomes, homeless in every sense that matters. The uniform that had seemed so splendid now felt like a costume. The money that had seemed so important now couldn't buy him a single night's peaceful sleep. But the cruelest cut came from an unexpected source. In London, where he'd fled with Peggy and their children, a theatre performed a play about the American Revolution. Arnold attended, perhaps hoping for vindication or at least understanding. Instead, he watched an actor playing Benedict Arnold betray America for British gold, while the audience hissed and booed. When the actor was hanged in effigy at the play's climax, the theatre erupted in applause. Arnold left before the curtain call, limping on his ruined leg through London streets that suddenly seemed as hostile as any battlefield. He'd discovered the final irony of his bargain. He'd traded his honour for rewards, only to find that honour was the only currency that truly mattered. The British gave him a pension and a cold shoulder. Society received him when absolutely necessary and breathed relief when he left. Business ventures failed with clockwork regularity. Even his children grew up under the shadow of their name, forever marked by their father's choice. He'd wanted recognition for his talents, compensation for his sacrifices, respect for his service. He got all three, wrapped in contempt and delivered with sneers. The cosmic joke had reached its punchline, and Benedict Arnold discovered what every traitor learns too late. Some prices are too high, even when you can afford to pay them. London in the 1790s was the centre of the world, unless you were Benedict Arnold, in which case it was just another place where people knew your name and wished they didn't. He lived on Gloucester Place, sent his sons to schools where they learned to lie about their father, watched his business ventures fail with clockwork predictability. Partners discovered his identity and withdrew. Creditors pressed harder. The invisible brand reading traitor proved bad for business. In St. John, New Brunswick, he found something like peace, becoming almost respectable as just another merchant. Then his warehouses burned under suspicious circumstances. The past, it seemed, was not past at all. Back to London then, older, greyer, limping more pronouncedly. Peggy sickened in the London damp and died in 1804. Still young, still loyal to the bitter end. The final years passed in a blur of declining health and increasing irrelevance. The Napoleonic Wars made Arnold's treason seem quaint by comparison. Benedict Arnold became what he'd never wanted to be, forgotten. The leg that had been shattered at Saratoga finally began its final betrayal. Infection set in, the old wound opening like a door to death. June 14th, 1801, the deathbed scene that opened our story. The uniform, did he really ask for it? Perhaps it doesn't matter. What matters is what happened next. Nothing. No state funeral, no military honours, just a quiet burial next to Peggy. The stone read simply, Benedict Arnold, as if his very name was epitaph enough. In America, news of his death met with silence. The monster had been defanged by time and distance. But irrelevance and erasure are different things. His name lived on, not in glory, but in infamy. He'd wanted to be remembered, and he was. Just not the way he'd intended. He became essential to American identity, not as the hero he'd been, but as the villain everyone could unite in hating. Some men are born to be heroes, some achieve heroism, and some, like Benedict Arnold, have heroism thrust upon them only to throw it away for £6,000 sterling and a lifetime of regret. The London rain that opened our story hasn't stopped. It never stops. Not really. It just takes breaks between downpours, like history takes breaks between tragedies. Benedict Arnold has been dead for over 2 centuries now, but his ghost haunts every military academy, every political scandal, every moment when loyalty and ambition collide. He's become something more and less than human. A cautionary tale in a Continental Army uniform. A reminder that heroes and villains are often the same person seen from different angles. The cottage on Gloucester Place is gone, replaced by modern buildings full of people who've never heard of Benedict Arnold. St. Mary's Church still stands, though you have to know where to look to find his crypt. The stone is worn now, the letters barely legible. Time and weather have done what his enemies couldn't. They've begun to erase him. But erasure isn't the same as forgetting. Every July 4th, when Americans celebrate their independence, Benedict Arnold is there in the shadows. Every time someone swears an oath of service, His broken promises echo in the silence. Every time a soldier chooses between duty and desire, the ghost of Saratoga limps through their decision. What makes a traitor? Is it the act of betrayal itself? Or is it everything that leads up to that moment? The wounds that don't heal, the slights that fester, the pride that poisons. Benedict Arnold wasn't born a traitor any more than he was born a hero. He became both, one choice at a time, one grievance at a time, one justified resentment at a time. The uniform he may or may not have asked for on his deathbed tells both stories. The blue coat that charged at Saratoga, the same coat that would have been surrendered at West Point if 3 militiamen hadn't decided to search a suspicious traveller. One piece of cloth, 2 different men, or perhaps the same man seen in different light. But here's the thing about infamous men. They serve a purpose. Benedict Arnold became America's necessary villain, the black mirror in which patriots could see their own virtue reflected. His betrayal validated their loyalty. His fall elevated their rise. In trying to destroy the revolution, he became essential to its mythology, and they weren't. That's the legacy. Perhaps millions of Americans faced with their own moments of choice, their own grievances and resentments, who remembered Benedict Arnold and chose differently, who swallowed their pride, accepted their slights, remained loyal despite having every reason not to. His infamy became their inspiration, though not the way he'd intended. The rain in London falls on his forgotten grave. The Hudson flows past West Point, carrying no memory of barges fleeing to British warships. The trees at Saratoga grow and die and grow again, indifferent to the blood that once watered their roots. Time heals all wounds except the self-inflicted ones. Those fester forever. Benedict Arnold wanted to matter, and he does. He wanted to be remembered, and he is. He wanted his worth recognized, and it was. Just not the way he'd hoped. He became proof that some prices are too high to pay, some bridges too important to burn, some loyalties too precious to sell. In the end, he got exactly what he bargained for, and that, perhaps, is the cruelest justice of all. So close your eyes and let the rain fall. Let the story fade into darkness where all stories eventually go. Tomorrow you'll wake to a world where Benedict Arnold is just a name in history books, a villain in a tricorn hat, a traitor who got what he deserved. But tonight, in the space between sleep and waking, remember that he was also a man who bled for his country before he betrayed it, who loved before he hated, who gave everything before he took too much. Remember that heroes and traitors are often separated by nothing more than a few bad choices and a legion of unpaid debts. Remember Benedict Arnold not to honour him, but to understand him, because understanding our villains is the only way to avoid becoming them. The rain keeps falling, history keeps turning, and somewhere in the darkness between what was and what might have been, Benedict Arnold finally finds what he always sought, the peace that comes from being, at last, at rest. Sleep well and dream of better choices.